Every organization at its core, every good nonprofit is shifting the way people think and talk about a problem. That's narrative change at its core. And you achieve narrative change by talking about the problem in the way that you think it should be talked about. Hey, we don't think about, I'm going to go back to prison rights again. We don't talk about that the right way anymore. We've lost the thread, as people say today. So how do we talk about it? Lead, be the organization that shows the rest of us how we should be thinking about what criminal justice means in America in 2025 and onward. So that's how you fill in the gap, right?
Hi, friends. Ever wondered how you could turn your big ideas into results? Together, let's reimagine a better sector, tackle systemic issues, and yes, raise some serious cash. Welcome back to The Small Nonprofit, the podcast where your passion meets action. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the Small Nonprofit Podcast. If you're new here, my name is Maria Rio, and I'm a fundraising expert with over 10 years of experience. But not only that, I also have a really cool guest for you. Hi, Dimitri.
Hi, Maria.
So, for people who don't know you just yet, tell us who you are. What do you do?
Well, I am a nonprofit strategist, communication strategist, and copywriter. I basically help nonprofits figure out who they are, what they do best, and how to talk about it so that people care about it.
I feel like that's one of the biggest challenges that nonprofits have. It's really understanding how to talk about the work that they do in a way that is impactful and relatable and builds on the conversation that's already out there. So, I'd love to hear a little bit about how you got into communications in the first place and what you're working on today.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm a journalist by trade. I spent about 10 years as a reporter outside of Chicago, working on a lot of public affairs issues. I worked at a small newspaper for about 7 years and then transitioned into communications. My first role was working with a nonprofit startup. It had been around for about 7 years, one called Life After Hate. One of the first organizations working to prevent far right violent extremism. And this is around the time of Charlottesville, so August of 2017. My job was to help the organization navigate all the press that they were getting around this time. Media outlets wanted to understand what violent far right extremism is in 2017. It's still around. What does it look like? A lot of people just assume that it had disappeared. I feel like my role at the time was helping shape the narrative for reporters. So I did that for a few years, and now I still very much enjoy working with startups. So nonprofits that are small, that are lean, that are still trying to figure out what should they be saying around current events as it relates to their mission, and maybe if it's just sort of tangential. I think it's really challenging for organizations.
That's one of the main reasons I reached out to you, Life After Hate, because I've heard of the organization before and I know what they do. But just seeing how much white supremacy and fascism has really come out into the open has put a lot of people in a hard situation because a lot of nonprofit leaders they feel like I don't want to bite the hand that feeds me. So what do I do about this government funding that I have to try to maintain?
Well, I mean, I could say that this was 2017. This was the first year of the first Trump administration. And there was a bit of a public flat overfunding. And I think a lot of supporters of the organization came out. And so the organization was able to recoup a lot of that missed funding through individual donations. The conflict was that it was an administration that didn't really think or want to believe that there was a problem with violent far right extremism. So it wasn't really hard to lean into your values at that point. And I feel like for that organization at that time, it was really important to lean very much into the values because that's what supporters wanted to hear. That's what they needed to hear. Mm, I think where things got maybe a little bit tricky was fast forward about 3 or 4 years when there was that second wave of Black Lives Matter. And now you have an organization that is aligning itself with civil rights, that's aligning itself with social justice, but working with violent far right extremists who are sort of defecting And well, you've got a movement that is working to sort of right injustices against Black Americans. And so navigating those waters was really tricky.
Something else that I was thinking about was with your background in journalism, journalists in general, like they want to show the truth, right? They want to get to
Yeah.
the meat of it. They want to show that to the broader public. And sometimes nonprofits, they don't want to show the truth. Like they'll hide a deficit, for example, or a leadership transition. And they'll only
Yeah.
show what a donor wants to see, which then kind of puts them in this kind of murky situation when maybe the donor isn't aware of the nonprofit's values and they're scared of alienating people by putting out a public statement that aligns with their values. I
Yeah.
wonder if you've been seeing that too.
I mean, it's a great point. It's a great question. Short answer, I think all nonprofits struggle with this question. I saw a nonprofit executive post something to LinkedIn that I really loved. He was talking about like this idea that, he's looking at an impact report for this organization. And it was, step one, step two, step three. These are the things that we accomplished. And the question he had was like, is this the best we can do? Do we owe our funders something that explains where the growth is? Right? Because, it's a tired phrase, but you're thought leaders in this work that you're doing, in this small little niche that you have. And you're growing, obviously. You're testing and you're learning and you're improving because that's what organizations do. And nonprofits shouldn't be different. They shouldn't have all the answers from the get go. So he was challenging his organization, and I think all of us to think about like, how are you doing this work out loud? How are you doing this work out in the open? And I think that's sort of what your question is getting at. There was a second thing that I wanted to bring up. There was a report that was just released about the media and about journalism and how cozy it's gotten to power and influence and money and what that means for independent journalism and public affairs journalism. And really, like, the short answer is it's terrible because, major outlets that are cozying up, maybe that's not the best word, but that are constantly being confronted by powerful people, how likely are they to report on public interest issues? And, the answer is unfortunately probably not very interesting. Now, if there's any reporters listening to this or former reporters, like, journalism is still great work. And there's still great reporters working for mainstream outlets that are doing super, super important work. But the takeaway for me, if you're a nonprofit, you should be your own media organization. When people sign up for your newsletter, you should be striving for them wanting to do that because they feel that your organization is essential reading on this issue that is close to them, whether it's education or homelessness or, prison rights, whatever. Right. And I think a lot of organizations get this right. But if you treat yourself, if you treat your organization, if you treat your communications as something that is there to inform the public, to fill the gaps that are just getting wider on public affairs reporting, then I think you're almost always going to get it right. You're almost always going to get your reporting right, your communications, your blog post, your impact statement. It's going to be more fluid. It's going to be more organic. It's going to be more authentic.
Filling the gap is definitely important, but I feel like a lot of organizations, they'll kind of go into this like self censorship.
Yeah.
Even though we have real censorship out there, they'll just say like, oh, that's too strong a word. That's maybe not the right exact mission alignment, but it is tangentially related. So I wonder what you mean exactly by like filling the gap and how a nonprofit could identify what that gap is.
Yeah. I mean, I think there's probably a few things you should be doing. Ask yourself and your board, do we have a strategic plan? One. And two, is it a strategic plan that we are using, or is it, as we often say in this industry, sitting on a shelf gathering dust? Because for me, the answer is always in the strategic plan. If I'm dealing with a crisis externally, not within the organization, and I'm thinking to myself, how do we comment? Should we comment? How do we comment on this? This is going beyond the 24-hour news cycle. It's got legs, as we used to say in the newspaper business. Do we comment on it? My first question is, how does it align with your strategic plan? Because that's your job, right? That's what you're here on earth to do as an organization, is to do this work and to make sure you do it well. And that should be in your strategic plan. And I feel like that's step one. So within that, ideally, you have this comms component or a comms plan. Do I have a comms plan? Should be your next question. And is it a comms plan that's strategic, but not just tactical, right? I think a lot of organizations have comms plans that are just like, you know, 15 blog posts a year, X amount of social posts. We want to increase followers. Well, yeah, those are tactics and those are goals, benchmarks, maybe better word, tied to those tactics. But like, what are you doing all this for? Like when you open up your mouth, why are you opening it? You know, like you gotta answer that question honestly. And as tired as we might be of meetings and little like internal summits, do it. Do it with your staff. Do it with your board as well. Like ask yourselves for real, what are you trying to accomplish in the next 3 to 5 years? What is it going to take to get there strategically, not tactically, right? And then you can talk about the tactics. So going back to what you're saying, how do you make sure you're filling in the gaps? Well, you've identified why you exist. And if you've evolved since you were founded 30 years ago, let's say, like, why do you exist today in the form that you exist? How are you going to be achieving that? And, forgive me for rambling on now, but a big part of what we do, and I know this is a big part of what you do, it's like narrative change. Every organization at its core, every good nonprofit is shifting the way people think and talk about a problem. That's narrative change at its core. And you achieve narrative change by talking about the problem in the way that you think it should be talked about. Hey, we don't think about, I'm going to go back to prison rights again. We don't talk about that the right way anymore. We've lost the thread, as people say today. So how do we talk about it? Lead, be the organization that shows the rest of us how we should be thinking about what criminal justice means in America in 2025 and onward. So that's how you fill in the gap, right? Because you're like, hey, this is how we should be talking about it. So let's do it this way. And how you achieve that, that's the tactical stuff. That's the nitty gritty. And then, on and on.
I like how you mentioned like shifting the narrative because that's something that I've been thinking about as well. And like how we can actually encourage people to do that. And I've seen some tactics. So one of them is you hear misinformation and you react to it no matter how much misinformation you're hearing, like you always react to it because you don't let that be the only narrative that exists, for example. Are there others that come to mind for you?
Other tactics for narrative shifting and for sort of shifting the narrative for people?
Right.
This might be politicians get this right. Mm, That's a strange thing to say because they are such a maligned group of people generally. But like there's a tactic in PR and politicians, like I said, do this right, where they're constantly bridging. And what that means ultimately is that they're only answering questions that they wanted to be asked. And I feel like nonprofits can take a little bit of a lesson from that, like so a lot of times it's not about winning a debate. It's about staying on message, as kind of corny as that might sound. So like it goes back to what we were saying earlier. Like if you've identified what you want to talk about, how you want to talk about it, and how you want people to think about this issue, then I feel like when something comes up, if it's really important and it's getting people's attention, yeah, use it as a news trigger, as a news peg.
I think staying on message, though, staying on key is so, so important for actually attracting the right kind of donors that you want to maintain long term, right? Like if you
Yeah.
have a really cool statement about Indigenous rights or something and you don't do anything to do with Indigenous people, you just put it a statement because you felt pressured to or whatever it was, then you're going to be attracting people who really care about Indigenous rights only to find out that you don't do anything like that. I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah. You know, Nonprofits are filled with very passionate people. And these are often people who want to hold power to account or right wrongs. They spot injustice and they want to at least call it out. Now, talking about copywriters, talking about people who work in comms, even development, our job is to solve problems. We're problem solvers. You've got to ask yourself, especially if it's a big leap you're about to take, what problem am I solving for my audience by saying this, by talking about this? The last thing you want is for a supporter to read a statement, let's just say, and think to themselves, why are they talking about this? Why did they say this? Because now you're confusing them. And then, of course, you run the risk of, if there is a big event that's popping off and you talk about it and you get a couple of donors out of it, well, what's going to happen next year? You lose them. And that's not good, right? This field has a big issue with retention. And that goes to the point you're saying. If you acquire the donor who was meant to support you, under the right reasons, like they'll stick around. I promise you, they will stick around. They'll go on that journey with you. But if they join your organization because they think you're doing one thing or you're talking about something, but really you're doing something completely else, like you can't blame them for dropping off. And that ultimately hurts the organization.
So I actually don't know this about you, so I don't know if we can use it for this, but so nonprofits, a lot of the time, they spend their time talking to external stakeholders, right? Like donors, politicians, the media, X, Y, and Z. But a lot of them tend to kind of ignore that they usually have a huge baked in audience of service users who can also be mobilized to further messaging. Do you have any experience in kind of like getting service users along for the ride?
I feel like nonprofits sometimes are surprised by how their clients view them. I think sometimes there's a little bit of a gap in knowledge. Like there's how a nonprofit thinks they're being viewed and how they want to be viewed versus how they are viewed. One thing that I think is really important that maybe nonprofits miss an opportunity to do is simply survey, talk to their clients. you know, um, that should be happening regularly. You should really understand how that group of people views you and beyond simply getting a data point for the impact statement, or the impact report. I think that would probably be a good first step in figuring out their perspective mm, and their journey with the organization, their evolution with the organization. I think that will tell you a heck of a lot and give you a lot of good information to help guide your communications.
So I'd love to kind of get your thoughts for the people listening, which is a lot of people who have a role in shaping the narrative for their organization and also externally. What advice would you give them if they wanted to make sure that they're, as they say, shifting hearts and minds, right? Like, how do you even track that? Where do you get started?
Well, I mean, there's the really expensive way. You could hire outside organizations that will measure public sentiment of your organization. But if you are small and sort of scrappy, as a lot of organizations are, and you don't really have an opportunity to do that, like I cannot stress it enough. Start with a strategic plan. Understand what you're trying to achieve in 3 years. What stories do you think the public needs to understand better to get there? Because there's a really good chance. I don't even know your organization right now. If you're listening to this and you're an ED or you're a comms director, I don't know your organization, but I could almost guess that you feel oftentimes, not every single day, if only the public knew right? Oh, if only the public knew how hard it is for a first year teacher to, if only the public knew how much waste there is at the annual music festival in my town. If only people knew the real cost of not recycling. I don't know. These are lame examples, but you get what I'm saying. Like every nonprofit has that. Like if only people knew, and let that guide you. Let that be the starting point and have those conversations. The one thing that I would say too, going back to the media opportunity, if you go around your organization right now and ask everyone from the front desk to the back of the room what our mission is, if they can't tell you, even if it's in their own words, right? They don't have to be verbatim. Like, I think you have a mission problem too, right? You have a deep comms issue. Link that back to your organization, everything that's happening. in some way or another, everything that you say, every story you tell should link back to your strategy and to your mission. And I would say one thing for media to work with organizations like you're a teacher and reporters are constantly trying to learn on deadline, no less. Like work with people whose reporting you like, talk to them, share your data, be be an organization that is helping advance that conversation by opening up a little bit more, being a little bit more transparent about what you're seeing. Because it goes back to something I said at the top. Like as an organization, you're constantly testing, learning, and implementing, right? Every organization does this, nonprofit and for profit alike. They're always making educated guesses about what will happen. They put it out there, they react, and they change accordingly. Like that's really good information for reporters to have, for news outlets to have. And so open up, be a little bit more transparent. And I think that's one way to really advance the story, and be helpful in advancing it. Every organization was founded because there was a story to tell, you know?
So I think you always have a story to tell. You just kind of need to figure out what your angle is, right? Because a lot of organizations they'll say, "Oh, I have a really unsexy cause," right? It's not sexy. Funders don't want to fund this, whatever it is, and then they end up kind of getting stuck there and not figuring out what is the why. Like, why do I
Yeah.
care about it? Why do our current donors care about it? And then positioning your story based on that and like following that along a little bit. Because if you have impact, you should have a story.
Yeah, and I don't know, maybe I'm weird. I agree with you 100%, and maybe I'm weird in saying this, but, like, people who are passionate about something, I can listen to that all day. I mean, look at what's TED Talk, at the end of the day. That's not popular because every single topic is of interest to a large group of people. It's because people are nerdy and they geek out about something, and I think we're drawn to that. But find your people, like, find your people, they're out there. It's a big world. And your organization might be small and maybe your mission doesn't sound sexy to use your word, but like there's probably people that really care about it. And maybe that needs to be part of your strategy for your strategic plan. It's finding those people and welcoming them in and giving them a home.
And I think also like finding those people gets a lot easier when you're talking in like very accessible language, when you're,
Yeah.
testing your copy, making sure that it's not just being put up on your website, but that people understand it and engage with it and actually want to continue the conversation. I think if you create conversation openers, like people will come to you and be naturally attracted to your organization. But it's all about getting to the core of who you are and having a strategic plan, having a comms plan that's not reactive, that is really focused on your future goals and how you actually reach them is such a key part.
You know, that's really important what you're saying about accessible language. I think we get seduced by nonprofit language, by like nonprofit corporate language, you know, where we don't feel like we're a valid organization unless we sound like, I don't know, NPR does sometimes. I like NPR. I'm not trying to rag on NPR, but like, I don't know, like insert any major organization. And I'm just as guilty of this. I ask people and my editors in my life, in my personal life to read something, just like cut the jargon out, cut the nonprofit speak out and talk the way you would to a friend after work at a cafe at the bar. Like, that's it, talk like that and talk in ways that you do in real life with metaphors and talk in with colorful, simple language, with picture words, as like old copywriters used to say, use picture words, lots of picture words, words that put images in people's heads. That's the way we speak. We speak with stories and we speak with picture words, and we are not didactic and we don't use, ironically, we don't use pick words. Uh, don't confuse the message. Just like be yourself, really.
Okay, so if people want to continue the conversation with you, where can they find you? How can they reach out?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, certainly LinkedIn, Dimitrios Kalantzis on LinkedIn. Please, I would love to connect with you there. I have a website, 515media.com. So please follow there, drop a line and say hi. I would love to hear from organizations that are working on communications problems big and small, problems like, I don't know, I feel like we don't really talk about the work in a way that feels authentic to who we are. I know that that's something that you work on as well, Maria, which is why I'm so glad we connected, but I love solving those problems with people.
Okay, and I will definitely link that in the show notes. But thank you so much for being here today. Your insight was amazing, and I'm sure my nonprofit leaders are going to get a lot out of it and hopefully go out and shift that narrative because it is a wild time out here.
Thank you so much, Maria.
And thank you all for listening to another episode of the Small Nonprofit Podcast. As always, if you would like to see our lovely faces, you can watch this episode on YouTube. But that's it for you today. I hope that you go out there and find out who you are, how you talk about it, and how you shift that narrative. That's it for today. Bye for now.
Thank you for listening to another episode of The Small Nonprofit. If you want to continue the conversation, feel free to connect with our guests directly or find me on LinkedIn. Let's keep moving money to mission and prioritizing our well-being. Bye for now.